I am Shaun Michaud, and this is Coffee Talk.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department at Berklee College of Music, and welcome to another Coffee Talk. As usual, we're hanging out with Cheryl Bailey, assistant chair. Hey, Cheryl.
Cheers.
Coffee cheers. Our senior coordinator, Ian Steve. Hey, Ian.
Hey y'all, how's it going?
And our guest today for coffee is Professor Shaun Michaud. Hey, Shaun.
Hello, hello.
It's great. Thanks for coming.
Oh,
Thanks.
no problem.
So the
Glad to be here.
first thing everybody wants to know is, do you drink coffee, and how do you take it?
Yes, I do. And I get my latest coffees are cold brew, black.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Is that a seasonal thing?
No, all year.
Oh,
0 degrees, cold brew, black.
Yes, iced coffee all year round. I
Yep.
love it.
Yep.
when did you start doing that? Did you always do cold coffee all year?
Well, when I was young, like college, I actually never even got into coffee. But I never like people would drink tea and stuff. I would never drink hot beverages, so I'd always had iced tea or stuff like that. So when iced coffee started becoming a thing at Dunkin' Donuts, I was like, I'll try one. So I tried it, and it was like quite good. So I was like, I like it iced. I don't really like it as a heated beverage. So yeah, I've been to yeah. So ever since basically since Dunkin' had iced coffee, I've been doing iced coffees.
That's great. So are you a local to the Boston, New England area?
New
Got
England, yeah. I grew up in Maine, so Dunkin' Donuts was always around us. It comes from the days of the commercials, "Time to make the donuts," where
totally.
yeah. So, and my dad's he's a retired Maine State policeman, and so in the middle of the night he would grab donuts when they were first made. Like at the because they used to make them in the stores. Like they did make them fresh. They didn't deliver them. They made them at each location. There weren't as many, and he would bring them home like maybe once a month or something like that. He'd be like, "Oh, Dad brought home donuts tonight." You'd wake up and they'd be sitting on the counter.
There's nothing like that when they make them and then you eat them right away.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I met the Dunkin' Donuts coffee guy one time when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah. Do you all know what Shaun and I are talking about? There is this really well-known guy. I'm sure you on YouTube can find the ads. And he would get up in the commercial and he'd be like, time to make the donuts.
Yeah.
He'd be half asleep. It'd be like in the middle of the night, and they had different scenes. And that was this thing, time to make the donuts, like this big thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Shaun, tell us about when you were a Berklee student, right? And then a
Correct.
faculty member.
Yeah.
And so you've had a couple different first days, and that's on the minds of a lot of people listening. Um,
Yeah.
they may be, we have people who have their first day, but we also have a lot of people coming in the fall that are going to have their first day on campus. And so,
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
there things that stand out to you that you remember about either your first day as a student or a faculty member or both?
Yeah, I got both. 1993. That was the year I started Berkeley as a student. So I graduated in the summer, summer '93. Started the fall of '93 at in Boston, and yeah. So the whole thing, my parents dropped me off, and my dad's like looking at me in the room, and he looks at my mom. He goes, "This is just this is so wrong. Like leaving me in Boston, like they just So I'm assuming a lot of parents that if they do make the trip with their students that are entering, there'll probably probably be a lot of that. It's like I don't want to leave. And so yeah, they left. I kind of set up my room, my dorm room, and then I spent a week standing in lines. So I don't think that's a thing anymore, but back then that was a thing. So it was like one line to the next line to the next line, sign up for your teacher, big long line. And so the sign up for your guitar teacher line literally went from the fifth floor all the way down the stairs, all 5 floors, like out to the front of the building. I think it was that long. I remember standing in a very long line that snaked up the stairwell, the main stairwell in the 1140 building, to the fifth floor of the 1140. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And so yeah, and the discussion then, I mean, this year we have, obviously the COVID vaccinations, but the issue then, I remember talking with a number of students. They're like, "Oh, they won't let me go anywhere because I didn't get my measles vaccination." So they were requiring. So there was that back then. There was measles, not quite as yeah, not quite as impactful as the current situation, but something a little bit, mirroring, I guess. Let's see what else from that first day. Yeah, that first night was really strange. Staying at the, like sleeping in the dorm room and getting up the next morning, and everybody was like super nervous. Like, so you're standing in lines with everybody. That's the one good thing about the lines, is that you got to hang out with your peers and meet a lot of people that you might not have met. Like, you would meet people at classes, of course, but 2-3 hours standing in a line, you're talking to, like, the 20 people in a line in a row around you, so. So that was kind of good. We got kind of social, way to break the ice or whatever. Like, isn't this line ridiculous? So that you could break the ice. It wasn't like, like, what do we talk about? So, so.
Shaun, who was your first teacher that you got after waiting in the
Okay,
line?
so this is kind of funny. It was Joe Rogers, and I took lessons for 4 semesters with Joe Rogers in the same room I currently teach in now, 5T,
With Joe Rogers. He's
with
your
Joe
roommate.
Rogers.
Whoa. Okay, what does that feel like?
Well, that was well, yeah. It's strange. I mean, it was at first. It's not now because I've been teaching for 20 plus years. But when I first started teaching there, I was like, well, this is a weird experience. Yeah. So, yep. So Joe
Wow.
Rogers, I had him for I took him for 4 semesters at Berklee. Um, Great teacher, fun lessons. Learned a lot.
Wow. So I have a question about that. So when you were a student, did it ever cross your mind that you might teach or that you would want to teach and maybe want to teach at Berklee, or was that not in your mind yet? And
Didn't even enter my thought. Like, I thought I'd be a rock star. That was
Mhm.
what I wanted to do. So I found a band. We formed, and we actually still perform now. The same band members. We currently do stuff. We do live stream concerts and stuff from a venue that my drummer manages. So full lights, everything. Um, and we put out music. We have like YouTube channel, and we have it's out on so that band, yeah, we thought was gonna, we didn't do too bad, but we sort of hit a wall, and then we hit, the sort of band members want to get married and have kids and those things, right? And so nothing will kill a band more than not being young and like impervious to not sleeping and like having any sort of outside life. So we did the touring in the van thing for a little bit, and we had an indie label record deal back when record labels would give bands sort of like development deals. Like, that doesn't happen anymore. But so we put out 3 records on Inside Out, which is actually the label that Dream Theater is currently on right now. So we got to meet most of them because they were doing side projects on that label. So we met with a couple of the members of Dream Theater during the time that we were touring and stuff like that. So there was some connection there.
Oh,
But,
cool.
what was the other part of the question? I might have
So
deviated there.
no, I think you came right to it. So then
Yeah.
after when you did start teaching at Berklee, what was that first day like?
Um, I so I had been teaching 5 week just that summer. So it was like the third summer I taught 5 week. And I got a call from Rick Peckham, and I was actually working 7 days a week at a recording studio at the time. I was like I think at the time I was like second engineer there by that time. And it wasn't a huge studio, but it was a decent sized one with a big 48 channel Neve console, 2-inch tape, the whole deal. That's what I'd gone to school for. That was my major too, was MP&E. So I was doing that, and I was only teaching 5 week during the summers. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'll do the 5 week in the summers. It's fun. That's sort of where I got the idea that, oh, maybe teaching might be a good, might be good. And then yeah, so I got a call from Rick Peckham, and he said, "Yeah, we're hiring another rock teacher this fall. Would you be available?" And I was completely caught off guard because I wasn't expecting it at all. So I didn't even know what to say. I'm like, I'm working 7 days a week at this place. I'm like, what am I gonna? So I said, can you give me like a couple hours? Like, you know, I said I don't want to say, you know, I need to like, you know. So I talked to the studio manager, and he said, yeah, you should be fine. We'll you know we'll rotate your shifts to other days, and you could still work here, and you could do those. So I called him right back. I said, yeah, I'm gonna do it, and he's like, great, this is great. So in the summers, the traffic wasn't quite as bad. And so that Leverett Circle thing, that had not been made yet. Um, yeah, it was before that whole thing. So this was like you go straight over the Tobin Bridge and take this precarious 5 lanes across, like, you know, 5 lanes of traffic right to get to Storrow Drive to get, you know, that was like that big. So there wasn't that nice, neat little, even though it's all traffic still, but it's at least it's a neat lane setup, you know, where you can get off to Storrow Drive. So in the summer, that was not so bad. I get there first day in the September and fall. I left myself 3 hours to get to Boston. I was late for my first day teaching. And so I like come running up the stairs, and Larry sees me, and he could see that I'm like I can't believe I'm late for my first. I planned for this ahead, and it was like the craziest situation. He goes, no worries, your first student didn't show up. He was a no show. He probably doesn't know the campus or whatever, you know. They set me up in my room, and then it was fine. It was like, but wow, like that was I was like, oh, what a great first impression. I show up late for my first day of teaching. But yeah, so I transitioned into teaching quite quickly. I had that year I'd had some articles in Guitar Magazine for Japan because we had a pretty successful record in Japan. In I think this was like 99 or 2000, somewhere around there, 2001. So I had a lot of students who had seen that article and they'd asked for me, so that was kind of cool. So basically we just worked on stuff I'd recorded, you know, that whole semester. Most of them were interested in working on that, which led me to, you know, my whole you know, system of analysis that I teach now kind of started right there. Was you know, going through analyzing what I had done and then backtracking to all the things I'd ever learned. I'm like, well, I never really analyzed anything I learned. I sort of just learned it, played it. It's like I knew what scale it was, but I'd never gone into an in-depth analysis of looking at things from this way, this way, this way, every way I could think of. And that was what started that, which, you know, it has made me a much better musician than I would have been had I never done that, never started teaching, never done that. So I always tell my students to pursue teaching and the idea of like, how would you show somebody else what you're working on? The act of thinking of that makes you memorize what you're doing at a level that you would never have done before. So, yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that and maybe share a few more examples about the way that teaching made you think about what you do differently and how maybe if there's an example where you could talk about that in your teaching, but then also tell us a little bit about the way that you think it really affected your playing in a specific way.
Well, I'll start with the last part. It affected my playing a lot in that when I used to write creatively, or you know, over the years I've written. It's always creative, but there's creative for my band, which is a separate set of parameters, which is more open. There's always parameters on everything you write, whether you realize it or not. You're never free to just be let's do whatever, like, you know, unless you really there's always some parameter there. So some of the parameters were my band, some have been for, like, you know, TV commercial I did. There's very strict parameters on those things, or television spots where I've done like throwback songs that sound like Duran Duran. You know, they want stuff that sounds like 80s stuff. So all of the stuff that I write, I am now able to like dive in and start composing from a standpoint of having some sort of a system to work inside of, like, because there's always parameters, so you can be more creative by having this set guideline because you're like, okay, well, I can only do this, this, and this. But how can I unlock creativity but still stay inside of these parameters, whatever they may be? Um, there's a lot of them. It could be that your parameters are absolutely has to be 4/4. We're not going to do 6/8. We're not going to do odd time signatures. We're not going to do 3/4. It has to be 4/4. So that could be number one, right? So super very, and having the parameters actually gets me out of writer's block. The idea of that, I don't know what to do. Well, when I used to write for my band, going back to that beginning part, it was kind of wide open. I'd sit down with my guitar, sit down with the piano, and just like basically bang on stuff. It's like, what is it? Okay, that's cool. I like that. Let's say, and it took forever. It still takes me a long time to write, but now my concept is I have something I want to shoot for, a general like set of parameters I want to be inside of. And so let's say it's for the song, I finished the song, but I want to put a guitar solo in it, and I say, all right, what do I want to do? Well, I need some more examples from my students of melodic minor to play. So how can I stay inside of the parameters of the song I'm working on, use the melodic minor scale in a creative way, but doesn't sound forced? And so I do that, and I've done that, hundreds of times, and then sometimes successfully and sometimes not successfully, but that's either way. So that sort of goes to the second part, and then I kind of forgot the first part again. What was the first part of the question?
I think the I just found it really interesting what how you changed by teaching, like how you started to look at
Yeah,
things in a different way because you were, and maybe in a deeper way in some ways, right? Like how
yeah,
they're put
yeah.
together.
Right. So when, let's say, like you go from kind of graduation, I learned, of course, all those proficiency tests, all of the things you got to learn, all the scale patterns, all these things. Um, I thought I had it down. I could play all those chords. When you start teaching, and you really take to heart something like, okay, let's say like a drop three voicing on the guitar, and you say, oh yeah, that's so I get the root, the 7, the 3, and the 5. I couldn't have spit that out at you that quickly when I could play the G major 7 on the 3rd fret, and that would be the shape, but I couldn't tell you what each one of those notes were that quickly, and then create a line off of each one of those notes or something. Or so every new way that I tear apart the fretboard on, specifically guitar, but it could be related to any music because a drop three could be done on the piano, it could be done on any voicing, um, so knowing those things to the depth that you know them, you don't really even realize you need to know them until you start till you do, and you start conveying that information to students repeatedly every day for 20 years, and you think about it and break it down in your mind. All those things, just you end up learning them at, like I said, at a level that you really didn't realize was possible, that you thought was even necessary, and then you go, well, I wouldn't be this quick at writing or working on my craft if this stuff wasn't so automatic. And so what I've seen is uh, I've been able to teach students from scratch using systems that I've created, and I see that they learn this stuff a lot faster than I learned it because of the techniques that I employ in order to break them down. And it does depend on, sometimes I switch gears. That's the other thing with teaching, is that you identify ways that you learn, and then you see the ways that other people learn. And then you'll have a good percentage that think like you think, but then you'll have a good percentage that are like, I don't see it that way. And you're like, how are they seeing it? So you break it down from their perspective, like ways that you kind of go, well, how did you connect with learning this chord? And well, I did this, and I think of it, and I'm like, oh wow, I never thought of that. Like, so constantly students are teaching me, they don't even realize it, but because I'm subtle about it. Like I don't make it point out like, oh, I didn't know that. I look at that, oh, that's cool, I'm gonna remember that one, and then I integrate that into my way of thinking, and then I'm able to, when I present how I think of stuff, like alternate ways, another couple of ways that I go, or you could look at it like this, or you could look at it like this, and then and then it's sort of one of them. You could see a light bulb usually, and you go, oh, that's how it works. Okay, so I'm gonna go with this method of teaching. So And all that stuff again, it comes back to my own creativity, because that in itself is creativity right there, is identifying different pathways of conveying information to someone else. And that's what teaching is and having them kind of give it back to you.
Shaun, you've spent a lot of time in the studio as well as
Yep.
producer, and not just as a recording artist for your project, but also producing and engineering
Yep.
a wide range of projects in many different styles.
Yep.
Can you talk about that a little bit, and maybe how working as a, really with your ears in that way, also influences your playing? It must have an
Oh, it
impact.
does, absolutely. The great thing about being in the recording studio is getting exposed to music again. That so I kind of, when you go back to music, that like everybody has, for, and I don't know what the reasons are for this, but everybody has things that they have a knee-jerk reaction to musically that touch them immediately, and then other stuff maybe you can learn to appreciate, and but it's not you or whatever. So you have that. So it got me past that idea of like accepting only things I have a knee-jerk reaction to that touch me. And I found that when I dig deeper, which means I had to like engineer a project, right, in a style that wasn't necessarily near and dear to my heart. um, it starts becoming that, because I start getting into it to the point where, all right, well, what makes this music work? What's going to make this mix work? So production and engineering, right? Um, like, how do the drums react in this style? How is the guitar supposed to react? How are the bounces supposed to interact with each other? How much ambience is supposed to happen in this style? What is it? What effect does that have on the listener psychologically? It makes you listen at a deeper level to everything. So there isn't a single thing that comes on as far as, like, I don't want to say the radio because I don't really listen to the radio, but let's say anything that I listen to at this point, and that includes watching TV and movies. And I'm just a lot of times taken out of the movie because I'm like taken with the film score. So I don't know if that is a musician thing, probably, but I'll be listening to the score and I'll be like, man, that's brilliant. Like, I'm listening to the sounds and the orchestration and how it fits with the scene. So at every step, I am listening at that depth. I'm listening to, and I can't listen to everything at that level. So you end up picking something you're drawn to. It's like you're drawn to a melody. You listen to that and analyze how that's working. Um, so kind of going back to working with different styles. So we had a lot of country acts come into the studio that I worked at, and I was never really into country. But then watching pedal steel players come in and watching guitar players that played different styles come in with tellies and different guitar sounds and how they played, and I'm like, I for a minute sat down and tried to play one of the lines this other guitar player was playing, and of course I have a lot of technique, but it's very style specific. And I tried to sit and play what that other player was playing, and I went, I feel like I'm playing another instrument. Like I literally I can't I feel like a beginner. It's laughable. Like it's that far away. So it's a great humbling experience when you see, even that's my instrument, right? So think of it from other instruments, like something so out there as like pedal steel, where you have a slide and you have to position that perfectly in tune, and then you have these pedals that control the pitch, in a chord up or down. Like, just the sounds that can be created from that instrument just are mind-blowing. And I'd watch these players do that in the studio, and it was all of that. And then walk over to something totally different. I work for a classical label, and so watching like concert pianists, so I did those as a not as an engineer but as a producer. So I'm like reading scores and listening to the takes, and later I would be the engineer on those projects because I would edit them. So we'd have The ones that I produced were over in Roslindale at a big studio there, a great big room with one of the most, I can't remember, it's Futura Studios, Futura, and they have one of the I guess one of the like most famous grand pianos around in this area at that lives at that studio. So much so that it was sampled by a big sampling company. They came in and sampled that piano. So we do chamber music there. And so yeah, I'm like I said, I'm reading scores. So again, I'm looking at a different level, a totally different style of music, and listening to all of and I had to really listen to the musicians too as they would talk to them about their performance, and say, because I was producing them. Uh, Not knowing the ins and outs of how a cello works, of how the things that they face, as far as like, and then they're talking about like, well, when I play really high, the pitch, it's hard to get this pitch because the distances are fractional at this point. So the difference between a perfectly in tune take, they sounded great to me, but the player was like, let's do it again. So we'd go in, we'd do it again, and you know what I mean? So, and then we'd mark them all down, we mark up these scores, and then I take them home to my studio here, and I edit them and work them together, and then I send out the edits, and then I get notes back from all of the players. Sometimes the players, sometimes only the composers would have notes. But sometimes if the players were very connected with the piece, they would have notes as well, depended. Um, so the style of doing classical music, um, I was not that great at using reverbs in rooms and things like that before I started engineering classical music. And that came out of necessity because we would get stuff that we would record all over the world. And I would need to make one room sound like another room or make it sound like it was in the same place, like they were playing together. And so I developed techniques that I didn't even realize I was lacking. so so again, this happens with playing styles outside of your genre. So yeah, if you work on techniques and things, it just creeps in. And I always tell my students that's a great way to create a new style, is to be over here, over here, over here. If you're only listening to one player, and that's fine. Now you can have a favorite player, but you're going to have only one dimension to your outcome of your playing. Players that have been most influential in the world, musicians overall, have been able to, I guess, reinvent certain style, like it's or rediscover, reinvent, like mash it up with other things. I could think of a handful. I remember hearing an interview with Dave Matthews Band back in the '90s, the late '90s, and they said their first rehearsal it sounded like a mishmash of like everybody stepping on each other from all these different styles, completely different styles. Um, Eventually they figured out how to marry these things together, and that became a brand new sound for the signature sound for that band. And this happens countless times for different genres of music getting married together and creating brand new styles. So I think that's where the future of music is, and I encourage that and that's where all of the studio stuff, all of these things come into your overall musicianship and awareness of what you're doing. If hopefully that hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear your perspective. I had a period of about 3 years where I was a producer in the same way, mostly classical music and
Yeah,
jazz. And I'm wondering your perspective on something we hear a lot, Cheryl and I hear a lot
yeah,
from students who are saying, "Oh, well, I'm going to be music production and engineering.
yeah,
I don't really need to play my instrument." And my perspective was always the opposite. I know people have different thoughts about this, but
yeah,
I don't believe, number one, that I would have been hired in the studio if I wasn't a great player and working on my playing. And I
yeah,
don't believe I would have been as successful, especially when it came to styles, it might seem ironic to people, but that were not my own. I felt like the only reason I had a chance at producing a jazz record, or a klezmer record or whatever
mm,
else we were doing was because I could really listen deeply, and I had learned to do that by practicing as much as I did on my instrument. So I'm wondering what you think about that concept of I don't have to
Yeah.
play because I'm going to be a producer.
I did hear that when I was a student as well. And I had several friends that were of that mind. They're like, "What are you doing practicing all that? You know, like we're an MP&E. We're doing, you know, we're going to be producers, engineers." Some of the greatest producers and engineers are incredible musicians. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people that are just know the basics of playing piano or something, or the basics of singing, and become great engineers and producers. It's not that that doesn't happen, but especially in today's day and age, you kind of got to be able to do everything. I mean, at this point, you actually got to become a videographer. You got to be able to edit your videos. You got to be able to make videos. You got to be able to do your own promotion. You got to be able to do everything. It's like you got to be able to record. So I think that it's super important to at least have one instrument that you're really good at. So I'll give you an example. I mean, I wouldn't even have gotten the gig doing the engineering for Parma Recordings, which is my friend's label, the classical label. He was kind of he auditioned me without really letting me know he was auditioning me. He's like he's, you know, even though we're friends and he knows I'm a great engineer, what he did, he said, "Well, I need an engineer to do what I was doing, you know, these sessions and editing." He said, "So I know you're great at editing and everything. Can you read this score and edit this piece for me?" And so this piece of music was one that they had already scrapped, and I didn't know this because there was a couple of very bad errors in the production during the actual producing, where some I don't remember the specifics, but let's just use this as an example. Every time an A natural went by, it was actually supposed to be an A flat. I think was something of that nature. So, uh, I'm going through the piece, I'm editing it, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, something doesn't look right. So I edit the piece and then I send it to him, and I said, "This is the best I could do with this, but all your A's in the piano part are supposed to be A flats." And then he emails back and he goes, "You're hired." So basically, my ability to read a score, hear it, and note that note was not correct, and there was more errors than just that one. I notated all the errors I found in it. But that was the main one that totally sank the piece, I guess, that they couldn't release it because they had to go back and re-record it because nobody caught it at the session that this happened. So, you know, and this was when the company was just up and starting. So he had a one office rental that he was renting with 2 employees, and he was adding me on. That was it. He had one sort of executive producer, and then one person that was sort of his assistant. That was it. And he was doing everything. The company now is in a fairly large building that they rent out in Hampton, New Hampshire, and is a multi-million-dollar company with a couple of Grammys. I think a couple. It might be just one, but a bunch of Grammy nominations, and I think like 25 employees, like more, maybe even more than that. So we're talking, you know. That's kind of aside from, I guess I was going off the rails on that a little bit, but it's just again, I teach this in my career class. I use, you know, my friend's example of building something from nothing and finding a place where nobody's filling that need, and nobody was filling what he was offering, which is access to mainly to he did, or you know, like chamber music, but his thing was finding access to huge orchestras, which he has now access to in the Czech Republic, St. Petersburg, Russia, and a number of other places around the world that he records. And his first couple of years in doing that, he was on a plane more than he was at home. So he was like flying around. Yeah. So, but anyway, that was my audition for that, and I didn't even know I was auditioning. I thought I was just going to edit it, and he'd be cool with the edits. But I, he wanted to know the score was correct. And that became a thing. Like we would, basically my ability to be able to seek out and find these notes, and then eventually figure out a way with some various software to fix some of these things. I remember one of them. I ended up fixing this high B flat or something that it was out of an orchestral piece, so it was in every single mic, like 30 mics, this one note, and they only had one take of it clean, but the trumpet player didn't play, it was a half step too low, and nobody noticed it during the session. And so I was able to basically figure out a way to delete it from the master recording and then fill it in with a sample and get it to match everything to everybody so it didn't stick out. Again, skills that were developed out of necessity. I don't even know how many people would know how to do that. I just like kept trying until I figured out a way to fix it. But yeah.
I think there's a lot in what you've said, in sort of, I mean, even if you go back to the beginning of the conversation, like you had this idea, you were going to be a rock player, you're going to have your band, and then you had to build from there your whole career years and years later, but based on all the skills that you developed.
Yeah.
And so much of it comes back to your fundamental skills on the instrument and your ears and your knowledge of music, and then how you can apply these things when certain things are needed. And so I think it's good for students who are listening to hear, like, don't box yourself out, like become really good at your instrument, because it leads you to everything. And I think there's so many things you said that I relate to, that, when you feel confident on your instrument and in your musicianship, you feel confident telling people, I don't think you're ready to be in the studio today.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have to do this again. The more confident you are, or they come in, they take a break, they come back, and something about the room has changed.
Yeah.
And it changes very subtly, but you might not hear it. And then you have to be the one to tell them, you have to do this all over again, or you have to keep what you did in the morning, because now we're in a different sound space. And if your ears and your playing aren't on it, it's hard to make those judgments for people. And then later they'll go home and they're not in the moment, and they hear it and they're like, oh, we can't use this.
We actually had a session. It was a very I produced this session from a trombone player, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name. I could look it up, but this trombone player had been on pretty much every major movie you've ever heard, in that was recorded in LA for a film score. So if there was trombone in it, he was first trombone. And so he contacted the label and wanted to do this solo record, which was written, very virtuosic, by the way, written for him by one of his composer friends. Well, that happened, what you just described. He has super confidence. You got to be like on your game to show up at a LA session on a soundstage. You got to be first time, and you got to sight read the stuff. That was his gig. So he came in and he had practiced this stuff down, but then he didn't realize, like, wow, like how really, until he heard it back to listen to it, how difficult and exposed what he was doing, because it was solo trombone, and that was it. All he had to sort of like give him a little cover was this large room that we recorded in. So he had a little bit of a blanket that would help him a little bit, but so we ended up having to do a second day of sessions, and then again we didn't match the mic placement exactly, so I had to put takes from both days in together and fix how the reverbs worked so that they matched exactly. But yeah, and he had a tough time that day. That was more of a psychological production day, like as in like working with people's emotions and things like that and their feelings, because music is very emotional, and maybe like you said, maybe you go out for lunch and you come back and you're like, okay, I feel better, I'm a little more and focus, and then you can get takes after that. So many things do play into that. bands. I remember bands in the studio. I saw that constantly. We'd try to do a take in the morning or something, and I would see it's not going well. And typically with stuff like that, we didn't have a separate producer. They were, bands just booked time at the studio. So the engineer by default kind of becomes the producer. It's like one of those things. And so I said, well, why don't we go on to a song you feel really good about? Let's do that. We get some stuff recorded, got it behind them, and then oh, okay, let's try that song again. And they felt better. They were in a better headspace, and they got a take of it. So there's definitely a lot of that, mental thing. And then just to wrap that idea up, I know from recording myself that particularly, let's say, intricate solos, I'll do take after take after take. They'll slowly start to get better as I'm recording them, but I still won't be happy with them. Then I'll hit a spot where I'm like, they start to drop off and get way worse. And because I know this, because I do this all the time, I've gone through that practice of that. I can recognize it when other people are going through it. I could see like, well, that's getting worse. That one was worse. Okay, we gotta move on and do something else. But we figure out a way. So for me, I don't have to sugarcoat it to myself. I'm like, I'm just gonna move on. This is getting bad. But for other people, you have to figure out, is this the type of person who, some people do respond to this, to just direct, this is not happening, let's move on. Some people respond to that. Others will shut down. So you have to kind of figure out like how the dynamics of people are working, right? And believe me, I've made great errors in judgment over the years on which of which, directly addressing nothing that I was trying to hurt anybody's feelings or anything like that, being very clinical and going, hey, let's move on to the next one. And that was the wrong way to approach it at the time. But it's only in seeing those things where you go, okay, we need to figure out, is this the way to approach it? Like, and the reason I always did it that way is because that's how I work. Like, I'm like that way with myself. I'm like, would I say that to myself? Yeah, I would. And then so I would say it to somebody else. But I realized that when you say it to yourself, maybe it's, that you're not getting down on yourself about it. It's you can kind of say, well, yeah, I need to go on to something else. So those are other aspects of, and they come into play with teaching too, as well, for sure.
Cheryl, what's on your mind?
Wow, so much great stuff, Shaun, that you brought up. I was writing notes and I was like, wait, but then I want to talk about
Oh
this.
yeah.
I mean, what you're really saying just about this bigger picture of developing your musicianship.
Yeah.
You have that ability to read the scores and know that.
Yeah.
All these things. And that is a thing, when sometimes we have students that say, oh, I'm not going to practice because I'm going to be an engineer. And you think about this thing of now, you start out playing, I'm going to be a rock star, and you're producing classical records.
Yeah.
And stuff like that you have that openness, that musicianship opens you up in that way. And I mean, I think about myself, and I don't really have any experience in what you do with producing but I go in the studio, right? And I think about the engineer I want to hire you.
Yeah.
Because you've got that huge ears, you've got the technique, the musicianship to do that, as opposed to, I mean, that's who I want, because, and the engineers that I have worked with are on that level where they can say, oh yeah, pick that up at the B section or the second measure of that, and they're not looking at the score because their musicianship and they're tuned into and listening in that way. That's who I'm going to call. I'm not going to call somebody who's, maybe just kind of at this level of a garage band player, because they're not going to, I'm not going to get anything done. I'm not going to get anything done.
Yeah.
But it made me think about, conversation I had with you one time where you talking about taking, you were taking a Bach piece and showing really, because, you might have students that are, I'm into rock music or this kind of music, or whatever. They get stuck in this.
Right.
I'm this, that's their identity. Not seeing that actually music is the identity. The big picture of music is our identity as musicians. And so you were talking about, you could take this sequence of a Bach piece and show, wow, this is how you could take a major scale and sequence it and develop technique and melody, right? So that's what I love about what you do, is that you have
Hmm.
that big picture of musicianship. It's universal. It's not genre specific. Great
Absolutely. Yeah.
musician's a great musician,
Yep.
right? So anyway,
Yep.
I just, if anything you want to share about that in terms of, how you use pieces like that or other parts of music to show those universal aspects of music, and also the ear thing too is
Mm.
a big part of that.
So yeah, absolutely. I like to draw from any style of music in which uh, I just I like to hear fresh ideas, and so the thing that I always remember is globally, I guess the type of music we're talking about is 12 tone music. So there's a lot of music which falls under us dividing an octave evenly 12 times into 12 half steps. That's what it all comes down to. Um, and so, how do we do that? How do we utilize those steps? And of course, you can bend in between those notes and stuff like that. That's, but so melody. Like when I gain an idea about how Bach did a sequence, I'm like, wow, I never thought to run the notes in this order. Or if I hear a pop tune that I'm studying, and again, pop tune from any era, any time, pop writers are some of the most skilled musicians that you'll ever run across. And there's a good reason for that. It's because you're sitting inside of this very limited scope of what you can work in. So let's say if it's current today, you're going to be in 4/4. Depending on what time you're trying to write the song in, what month it is of the year, you're going to have a set tempo which is really hip at that time, which you're going to stay in. It's kind of funny how that works, but you'll have a whole slew of songs that get released and they're all the same tempo. 120 BPM is really hot right now, or 100 is these type of songs with this tempo or medium tempo, or so you're going to be inside of a certain tempo, and you're only going to use diatonic chord changes. So for me, when I first was thinking about that and first, kind of working with pop music, and that's not across the board. There is pop music that uses non-diatonic chords, but currently, right now, not too much. And from when I've been doing, writing pop music for stuff that I did for TV and film that was supposed to, so very small parameters. So I said, well, how am I gonna come up with creative ideas with this? So I started just digging through all the pop music that I could listen to and listening to the melodies. And the melodies that I really was drawn to were the ones where I forgot that the chords were going 1 4 5 while I was listening to the melody. The chords are just there to facilitate some sort of movement. You're not going to reinvent the genre. So you can't play. You can do 1 4 and 5. You could do 2 3 and 6, maybe not all of them. Probably 3 or 4 of them, and that's it. The other thing that happens a lot in pop music today, which again not across all decades and all times and all the time, but generally speaking, is that you have one chord progression for the whole song. The verse, let's say it was 1 4 5. The verse is 1 4 5. The pre-chorus is 1 4 5, and the chorus is 1 4 5. How do I create a verse, a pre-chorus, and a chorus? How do I create a beginning, a middle, and an end? So you go back to Bach, and you're like, that melody, even though it's a sequence of eighth notes that don't stop, the way that the notes move, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to that sequence. You go back to how a pop vocal works, and you kind of you go through a tune and you say, how does the verse work? All right, in this song, there's a whole lot of movement in the verse rhythmically, but there's not a whole lot of movement note-wise. It's like 2 notes. So, and that's it. So it's a lot of movement rhythmically, so we can add a lot of words. We can add a little more, definition to our topic. We can talk, let's say a little bit more, and we can get away with it because there's not a lot of melodies, 2 notes. So you got to think about, if I'm really got a lot going on with one thing, I can't have a lot going on with all the other things. You can only really focus on, they've, in mixing and in music, even a trained musician can really only focus on 2 things. They say 3, but really it's two, and then if you really get down to it, it's like one. One takes over as dominant always out of this little triangle of things. That's in your mix. That's in your arrangement. It has to be in your arrangement. And so going back again to taking that melody, it's like, okay, so the verse has this like really rapid fire, real quick, little syncopated 16th notes. Okay, that's cool. Pre-chorus, what do? Well, how low was our verse? It's like kind of in talking range of the vocalist. Okay, well, we need to get up a little more in the sing-songy range. We need to have some longer notes. We need to have some higher notes. We need to have it soar. We need to have it slow down a little bit. Where did all the melodies start in the verse? Well, they kind of started on the downbeat of 1. Okay, well, the pre-chorus, I think we probably shouldn't start on the downbeats of 1 anymore because that's going to get really old. Okay, so let's circle back to William Levitt's book, Melodic Rhythms for Guitar. Brilliant example. I steer all my students to it who are trying to figure out how to play rhythms while they're improvising. It's a great book for that because he breaks down all the rhythms you could do with eighth notes, starting with 7 attacks per measure. And you're like, well, how could I do 7 attacks? Oh, I could do 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So wait for the 1 to go by, and you don't play it. So that comes back to my idea of like, well, how do I not play on 1? All right, well, you just let 1 go by, and you play something. You don't think about like, oh, I need to do something that's engineered to not start on 1. You just let it go by, and then start your idea. So if you notice, across the board, hit songs have this symmetry. I think it's by design. I think it's by crafting. I think it's by, obviously not everything that's symmetrical is art, but everything that we kind of agree is art turns out it's got some symmetry to it somewhere. It's got this high point, low point, middle point. If you go to a concert and the whole show, even if it's, let's go to heavy metal. At some point, you gotta put in the song that the tempo slows down, so that even though the drums never change dynamics, we at least have some space between the drum hits so that we feel like the volume dropped a little bit. Because if it's just coming at you at like 115 dB for 2 hours, that doesn't even sound loud anymore. It's just the same thing. It's like construction noise on the street. There's no high dynamic without low dynamic. There's nothing that's extreme to compare it against something else. It's only extreme if you compare it against something fast. Is only extreme if you compare it against something slow. So when you're soloing, it's great. You got shredding away, right? But if you don't have anything that slows down somewhere, it's like, well, okay, now it just sounds like a blur of notes. I got used to it, and it's like that the virtuosity, it keeps your attention for a moment, and then it's sort of like slowly bleeds away unless something else happens. And so it's sort of the pop music mentality of like, you got to work for me to listen for 5 seconds. And then once you have me for 5 seconds, you got to work for the next 5 seconds. And then you got to work for... So that means you can't have a dead 5 seconds in a pop song anywhere. And by dead, I mean like something where something new doesn't pop in and catch somebody's interest.
That's cool. Maybe I was kind of chuckling because it made me think of a thing Miles would say. Miles Davis would say, you'd always get somebody like Coltrane or Dave Liebman to be his foil so that he could play those sweet long melodies, and he would just like let the machine gun come out and like take care of that, and then I'm going to take him to this other place
exactly.
It happens in all music in that way. I guess that's what you're talking about, that universality of structure and all those elements that make it great are in all forms of music.
And so you can learn about melody everywhere. I mean, the Levitt book I was aware of because it was used when I was a student when we had reading labs. And so I went through the whole thing. I think reading 2 was the lab. I went through the entire thing. And to me, it was brilliant. I was like looking at it going, oh, this is like, I didn't see much difference between that at the time even than in Dream Theater, which is what I was really into at the time. That was my band that, back when I was like, 20, whatever. So yeah, we got. I guess we'll wrap it up. I guess we got. If you have any more questions to finish up.
Yeah. Ian, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think about that a lot, like just the contrast. We tend to get wrapped up in something, and I think that that's like a really good takeaway, is like a drink of water for something. The contrast of that actually brightens up what you do in the other side. That's like such a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cheryl, what about you? What on as we're kind of wrapping up this cup of coffee, what's on your mind?
I don't know, Shaun, this was great. I mean, you shared such a big, wide swath of knowledge with us. I mean, I'll definitely come back and listen to it and steal from you
Fantastic.
much as I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
There's
gonna
actually nothing greater to me than somebody else, hearing something I've said, and they took it to heart, and it helps them. I'll just leave you one real quick thing. I had a Berklee online student that I teach, and he's done a series of videos on YouTube where and he credits me. He talks about me all the time, which is great. He didn't have to. I don't really. It doesn't bother me, but it's just great to see him having such success relaying the same ideas, and a lot of them, what we just talked about, relaying them in his own words in his videos where he talks about them. So it's really cool. I like to see things like my playing, or what, just the ideas that they help people out. You gain a better perspective on what they're doing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if people listen to this and if you go back and listen again, like we will, I think it's so nice to remember at the end that in the beginning, when you come to Berklee, or when you start your younger years, you can't see all the opportunities ahead of you. You can't see everything that you can be doing. So all you can do is focus on building the best foundation you can on your instrument, your musicianship, and being open, and have those conversations in lines and meet people, because those people you'll end up working with. And when your friend says, I'm starting a studio, would you come and work with me? Do it and learn how to do that. And because you never know where that's going to go, what that's going to bring to you. And Shaun, I think your whole, what you've brought today is such a great example of how exciting that can be, and also how challenging it can be as you build your life, right? Like, there's a lot of good and challenging moments. So thanks for bringing that today.
Yeah, welcome.
Cool. Well, thank you, Shaun, and thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Ian, and hope you have a great day, everyone, and we'll be back with you on the next Coffee Talk.